Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast. My name is Brad Grew, founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
And I'm Robert Grew, founder and CTO.
And Carrie Hunley, Chief Growth Officer.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of the podcast where we're talking about making AI and automation everybody's business. So it's beyond IT. The conversation today is, and we've kind of laid the foundation over previous episodes, but it's not just IT's problem to solve AI and data issues. And so we'll talk about some case studies and some reasons that is going forward. Generally, we start with a little bit of news to kick off the episode, and just because so much changes in the AI space every single week. And so, Carrie, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually something I really enjoy, is bringing our listeners the latest on AI that's not just built for coders or techies, but really nowadays for all of us. So today I'm zooming in on Microsoft's Copilot. Think of it as your new go-to helper, but right on your laptop. They dropped some big Copilot updates this month, and I'm really excited about how that's opening up AI to everyone. So picture this: you're a teacher tweaking a lesson plan and your spreadsheet's a mess. With Copilot Vision, you show it your screen and it explains how to fix it step by step. No tech degree needed. Or maybe you're a small business owner juggling bookings. Copilot Actions can reserve a lunch spot for your team through sites like OpenTable just by you saying, book a table for 5. How cool is that? Then there's memory. It learns stuff like your kid's age. So when you ask for a story idea, it's spot on for their age, say a 6-year-old versus a teen. They would want different stories, right? And Pages is like a shared notebook where you and your community can toss in ideas, and Copilot organizes them into a plan. I can think of a million use cases for that personally and cannot wait to play with it. I saw that on Tech Radar and ZNet, and it's rolling out now on Windows, phones, everywhere. The best part, Copilot's built into Windows 11 for free. So you don't need to install anything fancy or break the bank. It's right there, ready to help a freelancer sort emails or a nonprofit plan a fundraiser. So Copilot's proving AIs for all of us, and it's your laptop's new superpower.
Yeah, we've talked about Copilot a lot. I think Microsoft's doing a lot of good stuff. There's still, in my opinion, some work that they need to figure out, but overall, the lowest barrier of entry, I say, and it really is good at that.
Yeah, and it's cool that they're adding memory, basically. And so ChatGPT's announced this as well. And you could do this before creating workspaces and uploading documents and things to those workspaces. But the fact that it can reference the memory and recall things from previous conversations is going to be really important. Because, again, the more you can train that model specific to your use set, your use case, the better responses you're going to get.
Yeah, and I know people have had, there have been some privacy issues. So Microsoft has addressed those and is now letting users control memory, data, or opt out, which builds trust for non-techies as well. And also scalable. If you start with the free tier, you can grow into the pro or with Microsoft 365 subscriptions and unlock additional power. It can grow with you. So that's really neat as well.
Some of the stuff I've seen this week, we're recording this a little earlier in the week, so I'm sure there's going to be more released by the time this gets out there. But ChatGPT, OpenAI's, I think they're calling it, it's hard to keep up with these naming schemes, 4.1. I haven't gotten the time to use it as much as I'd like to. I've done a quick API query on it to make sure I can get it to work. But according to reports, it sounds like it's a lot better at coding and development things. And so that's good for me and good for all of us techies out there. Just another model to use and try out. The other thing I've noticed overall in the industry is I think Google has kind of knocked on the door and said, hey, we know what we're doing too. And that's I think for the market, that's great. For me, I prefer Microsoft because that's the products you work, but anytime there's competition in the market, that's really good. And I think what Gemini's doing or what Google's doing with Gemini it's a lot of great things, a lot of integrations. I don't know, we may have touched on this last week. We talked about Firebase a little bit, but this agent protocol, I can't think of the acronym now, but basically it's integrating all of their products, and I think it's at least giving Microsoft a run for their money, because I think Microsoft definitely has this monopoly as far as the enterprise data, email, applications. Everybody uses Word, everybody uses Excel, but I think with some of these new features now that Google's shown, it's good to see at least. So really excited to see what they come up with, and I'll test it out on my personal Gmail account just to see how it compares. So those were kind of the things I saw this week that I thought were really interesting.
Yeah, so that was the agent to agent protocol, or A2A is the protocol you're speaking of. Yeah, and again, I did some vibe coding this week. So vibe coding, for those that don't know, is basically just coding and seeing where the AI takes you. And that's a big thing. You can go just look on YouTube, vibe coding. There's all kinds of crazy little videos and memes and stuff. Just to see where it would go from like an idea that we have for an MVP internally. And I took Gemini 2.5 on aistudio.google.com. I took it through like its paces just to see how it compared to, at the time, ChatGPT 4.0. Now I would probably retry that with 4.1 since it just came out. And then also with Claude 3.7. And I really like the responses. And mainly I like how like Google and Gemini, like they format the responses. And one of the huge things from Gemini that Google has a leg up with Gemini is YouTube videos. And so if you take like a 2 or 3 hour YouTube video, or even like our podcast, and you say, can you summarize this for us? And like it, being that Google owns YouTube, they give it direct access to the transcripts, and it gives you everything you could ever need to know about that video without actually watching that video. And so I find that very, very interesting. And I think since the tools are changing so quickly, you can't pick one. Just as you're building a solution, you pick the one that actually works best for that job at that given time. You just have to, that's just the world we're going to live in until you do it. The great thing about Gemini is it's free. They give you like 1 million tokens in AI Studio. Again, I spent 2 or 3 hours vibe coding, and I used like 28,000 tokens, and they give you 1 million tokens. And I was asking it very complex questions with several thousand character responses from like a overall major multi-tenant SaaS app architecture, and it just worked really, really well. To be honest, it's way more consistent as far as like performance to ChatGPT, because I think Robert and I complain about this all the time. Just like, is ChatGPT slow for you today? And we have internal paid team membership, and it gets very, very frustrating over time. I do agree that Google is, since they stumbled out of the gate with the image generation and stuff, the African American George Washington and silly things like that, they've really come out swinging.
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed, like OpenAI, ChatGPT, I use those interchangeably, so I apologize. I think they reached 1 billion users recently, or I saw an article. I didn't really dive deep into it, but that's just, they're going to be huge, and the performance even that I've seen is not, it hasn't been great. So, and I'm sure everybody's experienced that somewhat. So yeah, definitely use all the models you can, and don't just be a chat GPT expert right now. You need to kind of open your horizon and try out some of these other models with other vendors, because nobody knows who's going to come out on top. It's looking like OpenAI one week, and then it's Claude 3.7, and then now it's Gemini. Every week, seriously, it changes.
Yeah, and don't sleep on the open source models too. So if you have like a MacBook Pro or a high-end laptop or a decent PC, go to olama.com, and you can download Olama. It's a chat interface basically, and you just pick the model that you want. Like Mistral's really big. Facebook, Meta's Llama 3, Llama 4. Like again, depending on your system, it will depend on the model you can use. But you can also run these and just compare and contrast. And the beauty is you can, with Olama, and there's other ones. There's LLM Studio and a couple of other ones, but I really like Olama. You just use it and then you delete it, and then try another one and delete it, and then try, so you don't have to have like all this extra space. And that's something to do as well. And there's some cool things you can do with those local models in Obsidian, which is like a notebook type solution. Robert and I maybe do talk about that in a future episode, but just there's some really cool things. And so just don't sleep on the open source ones either. Just again, try them all. Be inquisitive, I think, is the key going forward. And it's changing literally every week. 4.1 is the newest kid on the block. I'm sure Claude 3.8 is right around the corner, and maybe Gemini 2.6. We just don't really know. Okay, so I think we have one more basically conversation for the news, and that's just Nvidia, and another $1 trillion company that's actually looking for ways to invest within the infrastructure across the United States for AI as we grow. Mentioned Microsoft's investments, their massive investments in that. Nvidia has committed $500 billion or $500 billion to the AI supply chain, and said it's building 2 new supercomputer manufacturing plants here in Texas. Again, we're blessed to live in Texas, and it's become like the new Silicon Valley in Central Texas with Austin and the others. And I think it's just Texas is a little bit more open to helping businesses and giving tax breaks and those same things. And there, we can talk about whether that's great or not, but we need this infrastructure to compete with China. At the end of the day, it's the US versus China. NATO countries aren't really holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to development of AI solutions, and more importantly, the power generation and the chipset generation. So if you care about the future of this country and the future of free information, the big thing is free information. It's crucial for these larger companies to hold up their end of the bargain. And again, we talked about Texas A&M and others in the educational space also partnering with people like Nvidia to develop it from our research perspective, because that's really important too. So we're going to have research, billions and billions of dollars invested in research. And so things are looking up. The market's been what the market's been, but things are looking up. Companies are still developing. AI is still the future. We're probably, again, a couple years away from truly revolutionary AI. But there's a lot of really great things you can do to streamline now. And it's good to see companies like Nvidia. They've been very blessed over the last 2 or 3 years with their stock prices and their dividends returns. And so it's good to see them giving back in putting a $500 billion investment. Obviously, they're going to see returns on that too, but it's still half a trillion dollars. There's nothing to turn your nose up at.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like 1 week, Microsoft's pulling back spend. I've heard a lot of talks. Private equity in the energy sector, just nobody really knows what's going on, right? And then you have Nvidia dropping 500 billion for data center investment. So it's very interesting keeping up with the capital market and figuring out how these guys are making these decisions, right? As somebody that's never worked in the finance industry, and honestly, I don't know anything about it. It's just interesting to see, to say the least.
Yeah, and some numbers, other massive numbers that they're out there. Apple's committed to 500 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 to 5 years. Again, they're building a huge manufacturing plant here in Texas for servers. Microsoft's committed 80 billion. Meta will spend 65 billion in 2025 alone. We're approaching $1 trillion of infrastructure investment for AI from the largest companies in the world, based right here in the United States. And so if they're investing in all of this, that's obviously means the tools and solutions they're going to be developing are to be focused on that. So you should think about it long term for your business to learn how to leverage all of these tools and all of this infrastructure that they're building. Now we can get started on the main conversation. Is like beyond IT, making AI and automation everybody's business is the title of this episode. And we've kind of approached this subject many times through the first 5 episodes, but I think it deserves an episode of its own. Moving forward, IT is going to just be a facilitator of these solutions. Again, AI is very personalized. It's based on data that's specific to a business or a silo within the business and or a team within the business. And technologists just don't have enough time in the day. They're putting out fires most of the time to even sit down with folks and understand how they can leverage their data. Carrie, do you want to just give us a start on why you think AI and automation can help a business, and why business leaders specifically need to take that under advisement, especially as we're fastly approaching revolutionary timeframes the next 2 or 3 years?
Oh yeah, man, I could talk about that for days. I'll try to keep it to the most pertinent factors, but I think that if you're looking at the now, right? So as we've said before, you've never been able to solve tomorrow's issues and problems with yesterday's tools, and now you're hard pressed to solve today's problems with today's tools, right? Much less tomorrow's problems with today's tools. You have to be the same as you do financial forecasting, because technology is so integral to every part of the business, and we're going to keep hammering on this, right, guys? IT is no longer a couple of guys in a drastically poorly lit small closet, if you will, with some big servers. Like that's those days are completely gone and archaic. Like that stuff is going to be in a museum before very long, is how quickly we're outpacing it. So you have to keep in mind that every day, week, quarter, or fiscal year that goes by and you're not looking at this, it's the impact to that is far outweighs the actual time scale, right? So in technology, I don't even know how we would come up, dog years or 7 years to 1 human year, right? In technology, it's many more than that. I'm not sure exactly how many, but you have to be able to just accept the fact that IT affects every single part of your business. IT is a very nebulous term, right? So what are we actually talking about here? We're talking about using the 100 SaaS products that your organization's already paying for, right? Getting the most ROI out of those, helping you pull new insights by connecting those systems and the data between those systems. So that's gold. Again, data is the new oil, it's the new gold, right? How can you best leverage what you're already doing today, and then cut the unnecessary spin? You don't need 500 tools to attack the same problem. What you need is a catered solution that actually integrates the things that are integral to your business and puts your own special flair on it to deliver what you need, right? Also, let's talk about from a workforce perspective. there are people surely in your organization right now that, are maybe, closer to retirement than not, that are resistant, that are scared, that don't really want to do that. That's fine. But you can't run your business, especially being forward looking, catering to that segment of your employees, unfortunately. And not to say that they're not super important, especially the knowledge that they house, right? But before they walk out the door, get systems in place that allow that knowledge to be captured and leveraged, and then create an environment where younger people who expect technology to be part of the program, that they want to work there, and they're not going to quit as soon as they get there and realize that, like, oh, you want me to do everything like the super hard way, and I don't have any bandwidth to get to the cool stuff or what I went to school for, or something that's going to help me get promoted, right? I'm too busy in the minutia and the mundane tasks that could be they that that's the thing. Kids coming out of college or just wherever nowadays, because they're using technology in their own lives, they know there's a better way. And I'm sorry, they're not going to sit around and just accept doing it the wrong way. Plus, people who are ambitious, they want to work at a company that is forward looking and that's going to continue to be around, right? The business continuity aspect affects so much. So I'll pause. There's 100 more examples I could give, but I want to let Brad and Robert give some as well.
No, that's great feedback. Again, I think we talk about it all the time, but like operating inside of silos is a bad thing. I read a white paper about a national logistics company, and I won't name the company, but basically they built an AI model within their IT organization, and it ignored some like constraints that the drivers, if they actually talked about the drivers and got feedback from the drivers, like what would you like to be able to get more insights on and automate on? They were looking at raw data instead of actually empathizing with the end user. Who's this going to affect, and gotten those things. And so they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars developing a model that actually didn't actually work because they were developing it in a silo. And you have to knock those walls down within organizations, because the organizations that at best are working across silos and across teams and across infrastructure and across organization are going to have so much more access to so much more data and be so much more nimble than these organizations that keep everybody siloed moving forward. I'm reminded back to something I learned in a class last year about survivorship bias, right? So I was watching Masters of the Air on HBO Max. I come from a family of pilots, and we were talking about just all the damage those bombers took in World War II. And so the foundings of survivorship bias was all those airplanes that came back that took all this shrapnel. They were like, oh, we need to review all of these planes that came back and show and like strengthen where all the damage was on those planes. When in actuality, what they should have been looking at was thinking about the planes that didn't make it back, because the ones that made it back, they were strong enough in those places. And so I'll provide a link to that, because it's a really great Wikipedia article with some good things. And it just shows that whenever you're not getting insights from people like the guys who had to jump out of their plane, and maybe it took them 6 months to get back because they were a prisoner of war, and an understanding of their things. I just think that's a great just like use case of biases in general, and just trying to understand. You have to empathize with folks. And as technologists, that's one of the things that most technologists are pretty bad at, because a lot of us are either extroverted or introverted. We're all kind of stuck in our ways. There's Nick Burns, a company computer guy, I think on Saturday Night Live 20 years ago, was very widely loved because that was kind of accurate to who we are. And I think empathy is the big thing for understanding how to build these tool sets.
Yeah, you were kind of leading me a good segue onto the IT groups. Like, I think the biggest problem, and I think I've mentioned this a few different times in the past, but it does somewhat start with the IT groups in some organizations, from what we've seen. And it's also going to start with the marketing department, the sales department. There's a lot of tools out there on the marketing and sales side. And immediately it gets shut down for various reasons. And it mostly gets shut down by the IT group. And I think where they're coming from makes a lot of sense, but here's the reality. These tools are going to get used. Okay. So either you embrace it and roll it out appropriately with the appropriate security controls, whatever your organization needs. I think a lot of people really try to overreach on the security aspect, when in reality, we don't need to have all of this compliance at play right now to use this stuff. So keep that in mind. But then again, as an IT person, and I've been over infrastructure, I totally get the worry, because end users definitely, and that's what that's what we refer them to, end users. Really, they're our customer. If you're an internal IT person, an end user to you is your customer. You need to make their life as easy as possible. That's the approach I would always take. And so that's what I would advise any IT group today is embrace this stuff. Try to understand, why are they using this in the first place? Is it something you could automate with Power Automate or something else? And then go from there. So that's the big thing. Don't just shut it down right away. Don't just assume it doesn't work or it's not going to work for you guys, because and I'm guilty of it too. That's something I've kind of learned throughout the last 6 to 8 months myself. Because again, AI, it's just sold as this huge product that's going to solve all of our problems. But the reality is, especially if you understand technology in any way, shape, or form, there's a lot that has to happen before it can even do that. And so I think a lot of people approach it from that aspect and don't ever take the baby steps. They just shut it down without even doing anything. So that's what I would advise any IT groups, because again, they're the ones that are kind of show stopping this. And I've heard this. I've heard this at conferences. I've heard this from customers, and also just people that I talk to in the business world. So just keep an open mind.
I love that call out, Robert. Like, understand why they're using it, right? I understand that every IT person, like, one of their worst nightmares is quote unquote shadow IT, right? But they're doing it for a reason. So, like you said, that's very valuable insight. And not only do you want to reduce the shadow IT, but you also want your team to be empowered and to be as efficient and effective as possible, but also to standardize, right? So when you have people that feel like they have to use their own bolt-on systems or products to get the job done, well, you certainly have 0% chance of it being standardized, right? So that's either jarring for if the quote-unquote customer is an internal team or an external actual typical customer. No matter what, those little bits of inconsistency breed confusion and or they just don't foster the trust and reliability, right? And even if that's happening at a subconscious level, that starts to transcend at some point when they get vastly different, responses or processes when they expected that should be the same across an organization. So the big takeaway here is cross-functional collaboration ensures that AI outputs are understood, they're trusted, they're usable, and especially when it touches business critical decisions or it's touching your customers who need to have, faith and confidence. It's funny what small things can erode that if you're not careful. So just look at these things with a different lens.
Well, and real quick before we move on, because what's funny is, and I see this time and time again, you'll have an IT group shut down an AI implementation. Like, let's just say Copilot as an example. That's one I see all the time. However, they're not tracking what their actual end users are doing. And so what's happening is the end users are just using ChatGPT personal, and they're uploading and using these tools anyway. So if you're not even checking or monitoring that, then really question yourself within, because I've definitely gotten in this trap myself. So just again, that's a scenario I see all the time. They'll shut down certain implementations, but then they're not even, what we should be doing is tracking, hey, who's even going to ChatGPT on our network right now. We don't allow that on our network. Or is it even blocked? Because I know some organizations out there are being proactive with that and blocking these LLM chatbots, which I don't think is a bad thing. Like, I think assess it first and then open it up. But also, if people keep coming to you about it, again, open mind. That's the big point.
I think the key point here is that you need to listen to your users. And while I was prepping for this episode, I came up with streamlining operations by working directly with the people closest to the problems. And I think that's the biggest problem with IT in general. And again, I was IT for more than half my career. I was corporate IT. Is we were worried about solving our problems, so the needs of the business and the needs of the organizational as a whole. But we weren't so much worried about solving the problems of the end user. Like, again, with our customers, we call them partners because I think it's true. We can't really solve their problems unless we understand where they're coming from. So just, again, work with the people closest to the problem. And like Robert was saying, these people are using ChatGPT. If you've disabled it, they're using it on their phones, or you're using it, on personal devices. And I'll be completely honest. Whenever we first started the company, we were all using our own personal ChatGPTs. It took us 6+ months to get up and running with the team, because we just said, we'll just use our personal, and it didn't make any sense. It's like, so we fall victim to this too. Like, there's a bigger fish to fry. There's bigger problems to have. It's cheaper to, I think the personal is $20, and so we could just reimburse you the $20 and save the $5 a month per head count. And there's a lot of excuses. And so I just want to be completely open and honest. We were guilty of that same sort of thing. And then once you're saying, we talked to everyone in the company, is like, how often are you using that? Well, I'm using it multiple times a day. Well, then let's do the right thing. Let's get it set up. Let's protect our IP. Let's protect our data and those sorts of things. And so we kickstart it that way. The beauty is the data is at the key of it. And so IT collecting the data on who's using these tools. Send out a survey. Let's create a Microsoft form for Microsoft 365 client. The Microsoft Forms are free to send out. Is AI something you and your department are using now? Are you and your team using now? Is it something you would like to use in the next 6 to 12 months? Just send out those basic sort of things. And you can go to search Google or ask ChatGPT or ask Copilot, hey, can you give me a survey to send out to my company? And then it'll give you the questions. That's using the tools to help build those solutions. And then you'll know within a couple of weeks whether it's something that you should be pursuing or your team doesn't have time to even look into.
Yeah, the big thing for me, it was always the support ticketing process, which everybody's messed with support tickets, whether that's on a consumer basis or internally in business. And typically it's not a great experience. You'll either, from an IT person's perspective, if you're not responding in a specific SLA that you define, you're going to be getting hit up via Teams or phone calls. And then depending on your industry, you're going to be more than likely getting called anyway, depending on the problem. But for those scenarios that are true tickets and emails, so emailing support@company.com, what I've seen, and I think it's a great thing to do, and we're also doing this internally. Luckily, we don't have a huge ticketing system and don't really have a big need for it right now. But the severity of problems, okay, how would you do that before? Is typically through keywords. Hey, if these keywords come up, here, follow this SLA process, whatever it is. LLMs, they can understand plain English, so it can also take intent, context on the email itself. So that process is I mean, I won't say it's 100% accurate, but it's definitely 30 or 40% more accurate than the keyword process that I've used in the past, and I think anybody's used in the past if they've ever set up a ticketing system. So that's a real improvement there, and just real case right there. That's going to show ROI, because how many times, if anybody's on the IT group, I know for some people this won't mean anything, but if you've had a setup where, hey, if it's a sev 1 or severity 1 issue, page who's on call. How many times has people been paged on call when the issues, it's not that big of a deal? So similar process there, and not even just ticketing. So that's ticketing, but you can also do this on whatever you use for alerting. So if you have an alert tool, like, to take in context, hey, if this happens, check this. So the way it was before, it's kind of a tree. It would follow a tree diagram, basically if then statements. And I think with LLMs now, it could take in the context, the plain English, also correlate with your ticketing system. Hey, are we getting tickets about this as well? So from an internal IT, that's really the biggest use case I see. Unfortunately, the internal IT stuff, there's just so many pieces that need to fit together, and that problem I don't think has been fully solved. It's getting close, but I don't think we're quite there. So those are the I'd say two things that I've seen recently.
Yeah, and I would say there's another aspect of that I think will increase as these LLMs and you get more contextual data across your entire organization. But how can you better serve the end customer and what's important to the end customer? I know, and I was in IT at large scale global organizations with tens of thousands of employees, and like generally you did the reporting at your team level and not getting a holistic view of the pain points across the entire organization. And so again, like empathizing with that end user, yes, you're solving that problem for that specific user, but over time, are you seeing trends? Are you seeing those metrics? Are you seeing the things that you can prove upon, use those tools to like just see if you're having these problems across the entire organization. And again, most people like work in silos, and even in IT teams, if you have a global organization, maybe the people working in APAC don't really converse all that often, except on large projects, the people who are working in North America. And so just keep in mind to always be thinking about how you can improve the lives of the end user, not just improve your day-to-day operations, would be my suggestion.
I fell in that trap.
Yeah.
I always talked about what was important. ITC even happens.
Yeah, it's easy to do that because like you're let's be honest, most IT teams are very lean and you're putting out fires constantly. And the fact that you may even have 10 hours a week to work on proactively, that's like ambitious. Most people have 1 or 2 hours a day at most to work proactively. And most of the time you're just, IT seen as a cost, not as a leader within the organization, I think is a problem. And hopefully these tools will make it where you can show that value moving forward. Carrie, in the sales and marketing space where you live and you work, how are you seeing AI improving upon that? But more importantly, what are we seeing whenever it comes to our customers? And we talk to the marketing people working with our customers and the disconnect from their internal technology teams and how they can be enabled to improve our
that too. Also, like, any advice for us in the dark closet IT guys, right, to help communicate? I think that would be really valuable. So
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole theme of this episode is making AI everyone's business and democratizing it, right? And so I think that that's so exciting as for individuals in their personal life, but especially getting out of the IT group, right? So Brad has talked about in the past like the concept of citizen developers and the fact that now we have the ability to have these tools outside of just IT. So Robert, for the folks in the closet, so to speak, right? I think again, the point is that you have to just realize that this stuff is going to be impacting your workflow, whether you like it or not. So do you want to be involved and you want to have some ability to guide and shepherd these things? Or do you want to be reactionary and it be this huge point of contention instead of moving the needle forward? Everyone is just kind of being territorial over, well, this is how we've always done things, which is obviously a very dangerous phrase, especially when technology is involved. But also use that energy, right, to move things forward and to make things more efficient and better. And just realizing that those silos are hurting you and it takes collaboration. But then I'd also you really challenge, the non-IT folks inside of an organization because you have the ability to with things like Copilot or even in your own free time on your own laptop, use ChatGPT if it's disabled at your organization and ask it to help you brainstorm like, hey, these are the types of problems I want to solve in my workflow or with our team. How could I maybe go about doing that? Low barrier to entry AI or even automation solutions can help that. And then have an open conversation with your IT team. So I think for IT, don't be resistant to understanding the needs and the whole purpose at the end of the day of what you're really trying to be accomplishing in your role. But also for non-technical folks, don't just sit around and expect IT to fix it because and that the problem is them if you don't have any of these tools, right? So the same as you can't expect them to understand what your pain points in your workflow are because they're not in your team, right? The same as you don't understand from IT some of maybe the concerns that they have. So having that open communication and dialogue is so important in any aspect of life. When you've got interpersonal anything, communication is the biggest thing. But here the impact to the detriment of the company and to people is huge if we're not willing to kind of pull our heads out of the sand and take a larger look at things. So and as far as our customers, they really are leveraging the ability to take, say for instance, leaders in an organization who are big on thought leadership or disseminating information, who are very eloquent and kind of mimicking that so that they can still have the same impact in their communications with a little less time. Or let's say that you have a leader that's very in your organization who's exceptionally brilliant, but maybe they don't communicate well. And so how can you take that knowledge and maybe put a little sheen on it that's more digestible? Also, we see, we really work with a lot of meticulous people, and that resonates with us because we're all pretty OCD and meticulous. And so the ability to get things up to the standard that you want your work product, whether that be marketing materials or how to engage your clients or at different points to maintain continued success and adoption, or when you're trying to gain new clients and how can you speak to them and meet them where they are. All of those things, the more that you can use tools for efficiency, the more strategic you can be to actually continue to drive the needle forward instead of just maintaining the status quo.
The marketing and sales teams within most organizations are generally the more tech savvy because they're using like the Adobe suite. They're using tools like HubSpot. They're using their CRM tool sets. They're already doing automation from their sales funnel perspective. So they know the basics of sales funnel. So my recommendation to IT teams specifically and or marketing teams for inverse that as well is from the marketing perspective, use these tools, use Copilot or ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini, prompt them all the same way and see which one you get the best response and say, as a marketing professional in my organization that has this size and these are our pain points, how can I convince the IT team to enable me to succeed? And what are some solutions I can suggest to get the ball rolling? And inversely, do it the other way. IT teams, like, know within your organization who are the little bit more tech savvy, who are the ones that their eyes don't glass over whenever you start talking to them about some cool things. Do the same sort of thing. Use all these tools. Go say, I need to approach the marketing team and about ways that my team could potentially help them with these problems. How could I do that? Dog food it. That's what Microsoft calls it internally. You dog food it. You use these tools to help drive the evolution of these tools. And that's exactly what we do. Like whenever a customer gives us their problem set, yes, we have our industry knowledge, but we've trained our models in all this industry knowledge. And they know like the last customer that we asked something, it gave this same sort of like guide for, framework or guidelines. And so that's my thing, is use these tools to learn how to approach other people within your organization. That's certainly what the sales people do every day. And that's built into tools like HubSpot. We use HubSpot internally, and that's built in there. There's a little AI. I can ask that AI chatbot. They call it Copilot within HubSpot as well. Like, I can ask it all kinds of questions about that customer and the sales funnels and those things. So just use these tools.
I have one more nugget, Brad, something that I would be doing. And as a former recruiter and have been involved in the people side of things, various organizations, if it were me, everyone that I am interviewing to potentially hire, whether that be someone right out of college, whether that be a senior position, one of my questions that I would be capturing the data for and aggregating is, how do you currently use technology in your role? How could you have used technology, but maybe you have not had your previous companies didn't allow you to use the tools? Or how do you envision, a year from now, what would be your ideal tech stack look like, or what would your ideal workflow look like, leveraging what's out there in the market today, right? And not to say that you're going to be able to bend over backwards and implement all of those to get ready to have that person join your team, but you're going to start to uncover some trends and some nuggets, and at least have that on your mind for your long-term plan. You're already interviewing people, right, anyway, so it's one additional question. As long as you're capturing that and reviewing it and seeing what insights are gleaned, I think that could be a really valuable way to get some insight.
No, I think that's great. I think that's something we should always be doing. And Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they have these strange questions they ask potential hires. And that's just, there's a method to that madness, and understanding more about their problem solving skills and the way they tackle those problems. One thing I always did as a hiring manager, I always asked people, I would give them a problem set, like, how do you solve this problem if you were working in a silo and you had no outside knowledge? So they couldn't go to the internet, they couldn't go to YouTube. What would be their progression on that? And then I asked them, how do you solve that problem if you have no roadblocks and you aren't caught in a silo and like the resources aren't limited? And so you can just compare and contrast that they are thinking of ways to streamline that process once those barriers are broken down. That's one thing I always did as a hiring manager.
Yeah, that AI question, I wonder like how many people would answer that honestly. Like, at least right now, because there is this connotation that, like, hey, if you're using AI, you don't know how to do your job, or you don't know how to write emails, right? And it's like, yeah, I'm not a great writer, but it helps me with my day. So I don't think it's negative at all. But I do know there are people out there that think that, and I hear it all the time, and it's very interesting. So
Yeah, there's a huge stigma, definitely, especially with, I guess I would say, legacy business. So the larger companies with many levels of middle management, the leaner teams, I think, are always going to be more open to it. It's kind of like the work from home argument, to the same sort of like questions. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be important to be honest and open about it, and that's why we are on this podcast. Like, we completely say, like, whenever we do this, it saves us time, and we do that because we're not doing anything special. I think the big special thing is we are open and honest about it, and like saying, if you're not using these tools, like just preparing for a meeting. Carrie and I are like avid note takers and avid over preparers. And like, we would have this OneNote page or a Microsoft Loop page, several dozen bullet points, because we want to have every answer to every question that could possibly come up within that meeting. And so we may have a 30-minute meeting and prep for an hour before it, or knowing us, probably 2 hours, which is not good for your overall business model, but that's just the type of people we are. And like, these tools just save us so much time with all of that kind of prep. I can just point them to someone's LinkedIn, I can point it to their website and the company profile, and I can give it the problem set and like, what are some questions I should ask, what are some questions I should prepare for, and then I can prepare that way. Obviously, my industry knowledge and my career knowledge is going to help me too, but it just makes that preparation all that much better. And like, marketing people are the perfect example, because marketing people are working in that same sort of space, is like understanding like what could set them apart whenever they're bidding on a project. Like, they have their industry specific examples, they have their historical submissions that they can revert back to, but now they have so much more breadth of knowledge, knowing that there's other tools out there that they don't have to go back to their SharePoint folders or their file shares and finding that previous PDF. They could have just already put it in. It's like, what did we do for that company? How could that correlate to this RFP? It's just changing how people utilize these tools.
And last comment, for anyone who's listening who maybe hasn't dabbled in any of these tools and is thinking like, oh, I'm not going to ask that question for a new potential new hire, or I'm not going to turn on these tools so they can just cheat their way through the job. I invite you to play with one of the tools and see that's if you don't know, if you don't have a baseline understanding, you're not getting very far, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Sure, someone could maybe take one small little tiny task and fake it till you make it type thing, but for the most part, you definitely still have to have a command of the subject matter in order for this to be truly useful ongoing in a role, right? You're not going to have someone work for you for a year and have zero capabilities in that area and just like skate by with ChatGPT. So I've heard that argument as well. And when when you're in school, they tell you can't cheat on a test. The knowledge needs to come from your own brain. But when you get out into the workforce, it's supposed to be collaborative. And so the ability is just another tool in your toolbox. It's another book that you can leverage. When PEs go to take the PE exam, they let them bring all the books they want because you only have so much time. And if you don't know what book you're looking in, you'll never make it through, right? So just if that's your argument, I would invite you to give it a test and see how far you get with a subject that you know nothing about. So
It'll only get you so far. Industry knowledge itself, I think we touched on it a little bit. I'd say it so often now, I may have mentioned it in the past, but it hit me so hard at that conference last week where industry knowledge is going to be dying essentially because you have certain industries where the younger generation, and I think we definitely brought this up last time, just the younger generation aren't doing certain jobs. And so, yeah, hey, ChatGPT can help you brainstorm and LLMs can help you brainstorm, but the knowledge that you have is invaluable. And that's never, I don't think that's going to go away for a very long time, in my opinion. So that's something to consider too. Like if you're saying, somebody's using ChatGPT, you're going to tell if they know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, so you kind of took the wind out of my sails on one of my questions, but the next little Q&A session we're going to have is just we're in a discussion between ourselves, but like what business leaders should know. And so it's just going to be a couple of questions of what business leaders should know about AI and data and analytics and getting those things happen. And the first question for that is, what role should business units play in AI adoption? Business units should own the problem, not just the outcome. So each individual business unit needs to take ownership of their problem because that's their problem. And no one in the entire organization is going to know better about that problem than them. IT is not going to know. Operations isn't going to know. It's whatever that business unit, that problem they're trying to solve. The people who live with that problem every single day are the only ones that know how to properly remedy it. And with the help of working cross-functionally within teams and using these tool sets, they can solve that problem.
I think it's kind of similar to, owning your health, right? And Brad has used the analogy, I know, in past episodes about, where a cardiologist is going to tell you that to stop eating the hamburgers every day, right? Much less Big Macs. So, but you have to take that ownership. So for instance, if you can tell that something's wrong with your health, well, you still have to go to the doctor, right? The doctor is not going to just decide to come to your house, knock down the door, check out your pantry, like see how many miles are on your treadmill. Like that's not going to happen. You still have to come to the table, right? And be willing to use the tools in your toolbox and the specialist, like an IT person, to support those efforts. But you can't just expect it to magically fall upon you like fairy dust.
Yeah, the thing with business units, one of the examples I've used in the past, as an IT person, when there's an outage, what is the effect of that? Because not only that, but how much does that cost us? I've worked in healthcare. Is this costing lives? Those are the questions you need to understand. Well, where do you go to figure out those questions? In a manufacturing world, you're probably going to the plant manager, asking him his perspective. But then that's not the full story. You want to see how much it costs. He'll tell you how much it affects the production, but you want to get a dollar value. If I'm sitting in my IT director chair, I want to do an upgrade for this infrastructure. How do I justify that? So just the amount of pieces that come into play to figure out these problems, that's what you need to think about. Everybody's going to have to come together. We call them champions. I think every organization, whether you're 100 employees or you're a Fortune 100, needs to have some sort of innovation room or meeting. And I would argue at least meet once a month. I mean, I would say at least bi-weekly, but that's when I, was working and looking for organizations, like I wanted to see people like that. I wanted to see organizations like that that are trying to improve their processes, not just stay stagnant and slow and steady growth. And so I would advise anybody out there, if you're a business owner or a business leader, definitely get these innovation groups in, because regardless if it's AI or anything, you're going to get so much value out of it. There's certain things that are going to get asked in those meetings that would never get asked otherwise.
So you keep taking my wind out of my sails, because that's another one of the questions, like how companies can create spaces for experimentation.
I didn't look at these, I swear.
Yeah. How can companies create space for experimentation and shared ownership? And the number one that, like Robert's kind of alluding to it, but start with pilot programs, empower teams with low code or no code tools, and then reward cross-functional collaboration. So reward and embrace when people are working together. And like Robert was saying, start those groups of champions, your all-star team. And then, Microsoft has it where they call it their garage project. So give people, 20% of their time, 80-20 rule, 20% of their time they're being creative, whether they're like solving internal problems or expanding their personal, their personal growth and development within the organization. The companies that do all of that, like if you look up the number of products that Microsoft and other in the tech space have created just out of these 80-20 like rules, it's generated tens of billions of dollars in revenue for these companies, because like Robert was saying, they're asking questions that would have never been asked before because they're working with people they don't work with every day. So those champions are really, really important.
If it were me, I'd also throw in a few of the naysayers though in the group as a smaller percentage, but hear their concerns, throw that into the mix, also allow them to be more closely involved so that they can start to feel comfortable or understand the value, right? I always like to pepper in a little bit of both sides of the spectrum, but most importantly, just if you have folks in your organization that are coming to you and wanting to look at these things and tackle them and be part of the solution, don't as a leader be part of the problem by shutting them down and then forcing them to either look for another job or look for a shadow IT solution or just become disgruntled or discouraged instead of being heard. And it doesn't mean, again, that you're going to necessarily be able to bend over backwards and action everything yesterday, but if you're ignoring these things and shutting people down and not being willing to look at things in a more holistic manner, you're part of the problem at this point.
Moving on to another question, there's like, and we've kind of touched on this so far, but what are the risks when IT is left to implement in a vacuum? And the main answer to that is AI tools may be technically sound but misaligned with the actual business needs, leading to low adoption and user frustration. I think Carrie's mentioned it several times, but how many people have dealt with a really terrible software or solution rollout? We all have. SharePoint had a bad rap for many, many years because on-premise SharePoint was very hard to do right, as an example. Either one of you want to touch base on like why them operating a vacuum is really tough?
I think that's the big reason why you're seeing this pushback for certain business units, operations specifically. You'll get some pushback on AI implementations there because of the poor implementation done by the IT group, because they didn't take them into the account. They didn't talk to them. They didn't figure out what their actual problem is. This even solving one of their problems, right? So if you're somebody, and again, I speak specifically from the IT side, if you love AI and you want your company to embrace it, you have to get people to love it. What will make them not love it? A crappy implementation of it. So you always gotta take that into account when you're doing these things. I think I'll pause there because I don't want to get ahead of myself. I have another. I'm gonna save this talking point for another section. But yeah, just embrace it and bring them into the fold. Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about, and especially Brad has mentioned, get those small wins, right? So the way that you're going to be most effective and actually achieve a small win instead of a small cluster, right? Nobody wants those, is to involve the people who are actually going to be doing the work and who own the workflow, who own the final outcome, who can tell you what they've tried, what they would like to try, what's kind of working, what's not, and have a better percentage chance of a small win with your first implementation, so that then now people, hey, that amount of time and whatever resources, human resources, financial resources, because that problem has been solved, are now ready to snowball into the next thing. It's same with like snowball in debt. Start with the little one or the one with the biggest interest rate. And then now you've got more capital that you can parlay into the next use case. Like, the longer you take to show a win and to start freeing up bandwidth, then the more discouraged people are going to get and the more you just have this ongoing problem. So just pause and take a reasonable bite of the elephant that can actually be eaten, and then take the next one.
The next question, what foundational knowledge do business leaders need regarding AI? And the big thing is they don't need to be AI engineers, but they should understand the AI basics. And there's a lot of great resources to do that. This podcast is one of those, obviously. But the main thing to know is the importance of data quality. And then obviously, if you're a Fortune 500 company specifically, and or somebody needs to be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant and those things, the ethical implications of utilizing AI. And I think that's something that we haven't really touched base on enough, and we will do that. I think we have some folks we're working on as guests to help us have broach those conversations. But just know that you should always be taking an ethical stance as well. Obviously, you don't want to use AI for, insert evil laugh here. But business leaders should just be surrounding themselves with people who are passionate about it and then know a little bit about it and then reach out to experts to help them implement these solutions. And again, the big thing is bring in those champions together.
Challenge folks to try and look at the less obvious implications. So, okay, that's great. We'd be a little more efficient, yada, yada. What is the impact though when something is wrong? So automation equals standardization and accuracy and reliability, like we talked about last episode. So that's a win, but what is the impact if it's a fail? So what was the cost of fixing the error on the client side, or the liability, or the loss of a critical team member because they've had enough of doing things archaically and they want to be modern and they're ambitious? And I would really challenge people to obviously look at the surface level, but really start to think about and pull the thread of all the wider implications as well.
And I think for business leaders, just have their expectations set. Know that AI is not going to solve everything. It's going to solve small pieces of your business, and be okay with that. So just, there may be some huge problem out there that, and I'm thinking of a few in my head that I don't really want to mention because they're things we're working on, but there may be this huge problem that needs to get solved. Seriously, don't start with that. Start with the basics first. And then once you figure out who in your organization can get this done, because I think that's a big piece of it, is finding people that can make things happen, whether you hire a company like us or whether it's internal. Because again, I think a lot of this stuff is going to come internally, to be honest, because as people get older, as the generation comes into the workforce, this new generation comes into the workforce, they're going to start building these things because they're also going to get industry knowledge and understand how these tools work. Again, finding the right people as well. And then again, setting expectations.
Yeah, be SpaceX, not Boeing, right? SpaceX has the end goal of ending up on Mars. I've mentioned this multiple times, so sorry if you've heard this before, but it started with Starhopper. It flew up 300 feet and landed after 300 feet, and now they're catching rockets with chopsticks. You should have this end goal of revolutionizing your business with AI, but just know you're not going to get there overnight. And you can take these iterative steps to get there and to have meaningful ROI. And that's the beauty of all of this. The ROI is easy to prove because you're utilizing automation, you're utilizing AI. You're going to know how long something took you before implementing those things. And the best thing is you're capturing data to have more insights about your business too that you didn't even know were there. So that's the key point moving forward. We've talked about internal champions, Carrie. As we kind of round out the conversation, can we talk about how executive and leadership buy-in is probably the single most important part of this entire process?
Oh, yes, it is, Brad. How can you expect the best leaders lead by example, right? How can you expect your workforce? It does not speak to your seriousness if you're telling people to use something that you don't use, or for them to understand something that you don't care to understand. And also, it doesn't signal for the people who are excited but maybe a little bit nervous because they haven't gotten the green light. That gives them empowerment. For the folks who are resistant, it says, well, okay, now I don't have a choice. I need to get on board. And then they're usually probably going to be very pleasantly surprised, right, by the outcome. But it helps everyone get on the same bandwidth. And there are people who respond very differently to whatever. It doesn't matter. Once the leader says it and it's a mandate, then everyone's going to fall in line for one reason or another. But the place that you end up is cohesive, and you're all on the same island, if you will, versus just having a lot of discontent. But also, how can you understand and lead the business units and the middle managers and those types of things if there's a huge disconnect? So we keep talking about how this touches all of the business, and it's strategic and it's important and it has to be looked at holistically. Well, we mean that. So telling just one group to do it and no one else is expected to, and you as a leader don't understand, then that's really not following that ethos.
Yeah, I think that was a great great summation. I don't think Robert and I really have much to add to that. We just know that we can't succeed. The problem solvers can't succeed unless they're enabled to solve those problems. Like someone at the top has to say, this is going to be this company's way of doing things. This is how we're going to do some things. And if you want the people like us who solve the problems to be the bad guy, I'm happy being the bad guy and say, hey, we're creating a best practice. We're creating insert company name here, way of doing things. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a pain in the butt. Yes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it is a good mentality sometimes. But with AI, we need a standard operating procedure, a center of excellence, if you will. There's a lot of different ways you can label that. And as long as you have a leader at the top who's willing to empower the people who are actually trying to implement these changes, I think it's really important. Again, if you create those internal champions, they can be those NCOs, right? The sergeants who actually get the dirty work done, the thankless work done, but they still need their officer at the top who's ready to kind of give them the overall commands and the authority to get things done. Robert, I know we've brought it up many times, but can you talk about how data is the foundation to all of this as well? And then, but more importantly, not just how data relies to IT, but how each individual business unit and team within the organization needs to take ownership of their data too, and try to come up with better ways.
Yeah, here's the thing with data. You need data to see, is AI makes sense here? Like Brad was talking about before, the ROI, understanding the ROI. For some use cases, that's very easily understandable. You can understand it pretty easily, right? And the example I used earlier in the show with the manufacturing outage, what is the cost of that? That right there is not even talking about implementing AI. That's just me as an IT director trying to figure out, hey, should we make $100,000 capital expenditure? So again, data is not just for AI. It has to happen for AI, right? We talk about that all the time. But data is going to help you solve all kinds of business problems from multiple business units. So, and I laid that example out, I think, pretty well. The other thing, one of the examples, and Brad's mentioned this before, like why are Amazon, why are Google, why are Microsoft, all these larger companies, they're really big and they do a great job at managing their data, obviously. Like the reason why Google can give you, although I'll say recently the search results haven't been great, but traditionally, right, if you go back, you use Google because it worked well. It worked better than any other search provider out there. So the other thing too, the other use case that I've seen, and I think Netflix has a white paper on this, Brad. I see this one in the show notes, but it's really good, and I've read this before, and I think we can confirm that. But the recommendation algorithm of Netflix, I think, is the reason why it's so powerful. And the only way you can do that is if you're capturing every single piece. Hey, when this person, before they clicked on this show, how long did they read the description? Did they watch the trailer? Are they associated with anybody else that has also watched this show? So, and then again, this is real big picture, but all of these companies are aggregating this across services. So Netflix is getting data from Google and vice versa, and from advertisers. And so the only way you can do that is if you're tracking it through the whole process. So that's what I would say. I mean, I feel like we talk about data all the time. I think that's our bread and butter. We honestly spend a lot of our time telling people about data. The big part for us and the thing for the user is try to understand that is the most important piece. Not even take AI out of it. You need to have your data captured. It needs to be clean. It needs to be accurate, and you need to understand it. That's the other thing. A lot of people don't even understand what they're capturing and why it's useful. And the only way you could figure that out is if you go to the team that utilizes that data. So again, that's where the collaboration comes into play.
And those are great insights too. And we will provide the show notes to that study from Netflix. I've read that too. Netflix is very open about their data capture and how they've used it to build their platform. There's some just great resources for how to understand data from your perspective. We'll link those in the show notes, which for those that know, the show notes are included in our newsletter, which is on LinkedIn, but it'll be linked that's linked in the show notes of the actual wherever you're listening to this podcast. And we give links. I think last week's episode had like 20 links in there. And so that give you a lot of insights of what we're actually talking about. And another one of those is empowering teams with the right tools. This is my little spiel at the end. PepsiCo utilized the Microsoft Power Platform to enable teams to build solutions. So they increase productivity by just giving people, Microsoft coined that term citizen developer that Carrie mentioned earlier because of the Power Platform. They've kind of scaled that back a little bit because of the whole shadow IT conversation. If you're a Microsoft 365 client, your team has access to the Power Platform in some extent. It depends on your licensing. and things, but you shouldn't be stopping them from using those tools. You should be providing guidance and frameworks and, like, again, setting the PepsiCo way of how to utilize the Power Platform, what those standards look like. And the only way you do that is, again, having your IT team work with these individual teams, getting those champions together, talking about these tools you have. Maybe it's not the Power Platform. Maybe you're a G Suite customer and you're utilizing other tools like Monday.com or Salesforce or whatever tool set it is. In your organization, you need to be having those conversations. But you shouldn't, like Carrie mentioned earlier, you should not stop people from trying to be more productive. All these tools, the goal of these tools is to help people be more productive. And so you shouldn't be putting up those roadblocks. And she kind of mentioned the leadership stuff before, but I'm a big fan of the author Simon Sinek, and we'll put these books in, but like he has one called Leaders Eat Last. And that's that lead by example. And it's one of the great books I read as an organization, as becoming a leader and understanding that. And they have one called The Infinite Game, where stop thinking in quarters and think in years and decades, because these are all solutions that, like, if you want the best out of your organization, this is one reason I kind of got out of corporate IT too, is because corporate vice presidents, they think in quarters because that's what their bonus structure is, where me as a business owner and as like a business leader, I'm thinking in decades. And so there's a lot of great things in those that I think we can learn from, but all of this to get done across these large organizations takes a great leader. You can have these individuals working on the front lines, doing the best they can, but that's one soldier in a foxhole. They're not going to change overall the arching of the war. They can make progress on the battlefield they're on, but it takes a leader at the top to make those changes and to enable those people to succeed. So I think from there, this is one of our longer episodes. Again, I think it's just because we love talking about this stuff. And I think we're going to stop. We're going to wrap it up with what we call a panelist hot take. And we're trying some new things, but it's basically just one or two sentences from each one of us about what we've been talking about today. And if you could take one thing from this episode, we hope you take this. And so, Carrie, do you want to take us first?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, going back to that leadership enablement. If your C-suite isn't using and evangelizing these tools, then no one's going to do it. AI and technology does not scale from the bottom up alone. Sure, as we've discussed at detail today, that there is an element of that, but that in and of itself is not going to be effective. So you really have to, as a leader, model adoption, fund the ability to do, at the very least, experimentation, small wins, pilot programs, proof of value, whatever term resonates with you. You all know what I'm talking about. Open the purse strings. IT is not its own budget anymore. As we've talked about, it touches everything. So that budget, it should be looked at more holistically as well. And then celebrating and sharing internal wins. Make it visible that AI is and automation and technology in general is important and useful and successful inside of your organization. And I mean, how could you not get groundswell with that? And one other thing I really just want to add that came to me a second ago, Brad, before you switched us to the hot takes, is just, if you're one of those people that thinks you're going to wait and just be able to flip on the quote unquote AI light switch. We work a lot with AEC field, and like, to use an analogy, in your house or in your office, if you flip on a light switch, how much went into making that work? You had to have power run to the site. You have to have wires going through the house or the office building. There's a whole lot that happens for that quote unquote light switch to flip on and let there be light. So just think about technology in that same manner in your organization.
That's fantastic. Robert, what's your hot take from this one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think company politics, that's a big thing that's not discussed, but you have to know who to go to. And regardless of what position you're in, you got to know who to go to get what you need, either if it's information or if it's money for projects or whatever it is. One of my last bosses, Dave, if you're listening to this, text me, because you said you listen to this. So this will be a test to see if you are. But he gave me a book on one of my first couple of weeks called The First 90 Days. That's specific to your new role that you just got, but you can take what you learned from that book and expand that out, because it teaches you how to build relationships in the first 90 days. So, and the only way you can get things done, regardless of your role or business unit, is going to be relationships. So that's mine.
Yeah, relationships are so key to all this. And again, that's why it takes leadership at the top to kind of drive those sort of things. And that kind of intros me to my hot take, which AI needs to be a business strategy, not a tech project. Once again, AI needs to be a business strategy. This is not a technology problem. Technology is part of the actual solution. Too many companies treat AI like the shiny object that IT owns. That's just not the reality of the situation. That's not the baseline of IT. And we can have that conversation about CapEx versus OpEx. AI's budget should not come out of IT. It just shouldn't. It should be spread across the entire organization, and it should be spread, maybe looked at from a perspective of which things you need to develop in your organization. Well, again, we're talking about that ROI, and you prioritize those things. And doing the budgeting for this annually is just not something that's going to be tenable going forward. Not even quarterly. And I know that's really hard for people to see, but things are coming so quickly. Let's say like GPT 4.1 came out today or yesterday, and that revolutionized things. And your company's not even looking at it until your next fiscal year. Meanwhile, all the other companies who are your competitors are looking at it now. And so you just have to maybe have that little extra rainy day fund sitting around for the next AI invention that could revolutionize your business. Not even just AI, but any kind of like automation tool set or anything that could revolutionize your business. So again, I think you need to talk to your leadership as a whole and just look at things financially different. Okay, I think we've gotten to a point in the conversation where we can wrap things up. Carrie, do you just want to give us a couple minutes of the call to action, and please mention our shiny new TikTok and the fact that we're also uploading YouTube shorts?
Oh, yes. Well, we are now streaming live on your favorite platform. In the show notes, we thankfully have a master link that will pull up a wonderful menu for you to engage with us across all of the ways that you can, including our shiny new TikTok and our LinkedIn newsletter, our website, and all of the various platforms that you can find us on. Any of those, you can also drop us a comment, send us a message, let us know what you're liking, what you would like to see more of, or if something you thought was not helpful, feel free to let us know that too. Any wins, any developments as far as how you're using this in your personal life, we'd love to feature some of those. So you can reach us at contact@digitalmeld.io or via any of the platforms. Just send us a message and feel free to show us some love if this is helpful for you.
Yeah, we have an open door policy, so we're happy to give insights and feedback as we can. As you can tell, like this is over an hour episode again, because we just can't shut up about it. And we hope you enjoy listening to this. With the feedback we've gotten has been great, and so thank you. And that's why we've expanded to other places as well. So like, well, you're not on TikTok. My niece asked me, like, why aren't you on TikTok? You're on everything else. I'm like, well, I guess I have to fall in with the Gen Alpha now, I guess is what it is, the Gen Alpha age. And so here we are on TikTok, unless it's going to be shut down by the government. We'll see that. But we thank you for joining us on the latest episode of Smart Solve Think Big. We'll be back again next week with another episode. I don't know what that episode is yet because we're working on some guests. There's a bunch of stuff in the air, but just know it's going to be something AI and automation related. And we can transform your business. So with that said, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.